So the formal education side of it's very, very important, but of course then it's about trying to get into a situation where you can get experience with that and make it really a meaningful, if you like, collaboration of the two. One of the things that I promised myself when I started was to try and be as much as myself as possible. I think when you work with managers and coaches throughout your career, you're going to be influenced by the ones that you admire, the ones that maybe you don't get on with quite so easily with. But I think communicating with some clarity with the people that you work with is going to be very, very important. You don't always get it right, of course, and the experience that you gain and the variety of experiences that you gain, I think it's trying to find a way of utilising them in an appropriate way to the situation that you're working in. Because otherwise, you know, it's got to be relevant to whatever you've whatever you're dealing with at any given time. But the honest answer is that I think when you start off, you have a you have a view that it's a bit more idealistic, and as you gain experience and you experience good and bad times, you learn to cope in different ways and you rely on the people that you work with. I think football is coming more into line now with the business world, so to speak. I think there's a greater awareness of the requirement to run football clubs as a structurally and financially competitive entity, if you like. So, you know, as clubs develop and sort of widen certainly the bigger clubs as they sort of widen their sort of business plan, there are different opportunities, but of course I think it's really important that people go into whatever they end up doing, whether it be to do with media, whether it be to do with coaching, whether it to do with the business aspects. It's about trying to get some sort of applied knowledge, and so the formal education side of it's very, very important, but of course then it's about trying to get into a situation where you can get experience with that and make it really a meaningful, if you like, collaboration of the two. But I do think, I think it's really good that now there are courses available which give a diversity of areas to work in within professional sport, because it's a love of the British people. You know, people have a real connection with sports, and not everybody can go out there and play it, but to work in sport can still be very, very it's very interesting, very stimulating as well. And I think that it just means that in the business that I'm in football, there has to be that awareness of what the capability, what the sort of expectations are, what the capabilities are of a football club, and having people who are good at what they do just makes the operation a lot more professional and slicker. I think there is a need for somebody in my position to at least spend time understanding what the dynamics are of if you like, the business model of the football club. My personal opinion is always I try and make contact with as many areas as the club as possible, because I think it's really important for people to feel a part of the journey, whether you're involved at the sharp end, as I would be as a manager, or whether you're involved in one of the support mechanisms or one of the departments which actually underpins the day-to-day running of the football club. In my experience, people in football, people who work within football clubs, like we all do, like to be valued. And I think, but just on a purely, so that's on a personal level. On a business level, of course, yeah, I mean, it makes sense for you to get as much information as possible as to the health of the business and the dynamics of how things work. I mean, it's common sense that is an important element of being a part of an organisation. You know, sometimes fans might see a hierarchy or a model of a hierarchy that they think is important at a football club. The reality might be something different, you know, because how things work within a club could be subtly different. And I think it's, when you're involved in it, you need to really understand the, you know, those subtle changes and differences and nuances within the working practices. Yeah, I think the awareness is greater, and I think the understanding and the tolerance of people to accept that mental health can be an issue across the board for staff members. You know, football should be no different to any other walk of life in that regard. I mean, you've asked me about the pressure and how potentially you deal with it. I mean, I've been fortunate to work at clubs where there have been people within the staff who are actively there as support for players and staff. They don't always have to be visible necessarily, but I think if people are aware, and people are aware at those clubs, that there is the facility to at least have support when required. It's been a taboo subject for a long time, and I think certainly for players, managers, coaches, where they're in the public eye, sometimes coming out and admitting that you have problems can be perceived, or has been perceived, as a weakness. And I think that's been a real stumbling block and a real hindrance, and it blocks people from even approaching the subject. But of course, it's a very real problem in modern society, and it's been a problem for a long time, but it's just not been openly accepted or openly, people haven't been encouraged to at least deal with it in the public domain. I still think there are instances where a lot of people would feel vulnerable in talking openly about it. But I think that the biggest point, the most important aspect, is that there is help available for people, and I think that's always a worthwhile starting point. The LMA, who I'm attached to, being a manager, offer support to managers and coaches. The PFA do the same for players, and I think that it's a good start. I think there has to be a sensitivity to understanding what individuals are going through in terms of their. So confidentiality is a huge aspect of helping people to start helping themselves. If you understand where I'm coming from with that, and what I mean by that is that one of the most difficult things is to actually start the conversation. I think it's when I've worked with players who've had some, I think we have to be clear here that it just doesn't have to be dealing with depression. It can be, if you're looking just a purely football turn, a loss of confidence with players, and which can turn into an anxiety based, stress related reaction. Doesn't necessarily mean it goes over into what would be deemed clinical depression, but they are all, these are all areas of mental well-being that you need to be able to help with, and I think we've come out of that generation where everything's to do with character building and just get on with it. There is a sensitivity now, and I think there is an understanding of individuals' needs. As always, like I've said before, it's difficult to find that first step, but having the ability to talk to somebody about issues is always a if you like, a release, and from there, depends on who that person is who you're talking to, can either point you in the right direction. But I think, look, we're talking these days now about, so for instance, if it was to do with the students on the course, dealing with the workload, dealing with the pressures and timescales and the deadlines of producing pieces of work, and I've been in that situation myself in the last couple of years on the course I've been doing. So, you can put yourself under undue pressures, and I think, but there is always a way to seek help on that. As an employer, there are still things that are going to be, it's going to set you aside from somebody else. For sure, having a sort of ability, I'm going to contradict myself here, you've got to be driven to want to, and you've got to be clear in terms of your ambition in some ways, but you've also got to have the flexibility to actually fit in with working in different work environments, because certainly in football, I wouldn't think there are too many places that are exactly the same, and so you find that you've got to have this ability to adapt. At the clubs, certainly at Leicester on the 2 occasions I was there, and certainly at Hull as well, we as staff, when we were bringing, whether it be work experience or whether internships, when we were bringing young people into the club, we always had an interview process where a group of staff were involved in it. So it wasn't just me as the manager, it would be, and even if it was for the sports science department or for the medical department or the analyst or whatever, just in the football environment, we would always have a group of staff sitting in and evaluating what they brought in terms of the skills of that job, but almost as importantly, or even sometimes more importantly, it would be about the personality, the ability to cooperate and be adaptable. So the academic side is important for sure, but also the ability to fit in and if you like, send the right signals across. But I've heard people talking earlier saying about, if you go into an interview, you need to get as much experience as possible. You've got to go and make sure that you're available to find experience, even if you're volunteering to start with. If you can go into an interview and you've got a wealth of, it doesn't have to be all in the same area, it can be different experiences. You've got a much better chance of being employable, and I think people will recognise the drive and the experience to go with the skills as well.